If I said to you I've never made a mistake, that would be my first one because it would be a lie. Okay, it wouldn't be my first one because I know I've made mistakes. That's what makes it a lie. And I know that you have the same problem. And by that I mean you've made mistakes. And you know that you made mistakes. But I'm also willing to bet that somewhere along the way you've had behavior, comments, thoughts, interactions with people that in your mind were perfectly normal, perfectly acceptable. There was nothing wrong with them. But the other person, they took offense. Here's how you might know. Perhaps as you were driving in traffic, you got a nice wave, but it was with only one finger. And you thought to yourself all the way to the next red light, what did I do to deserve that? Chances are you made a mistake. Hi, I'm J Loren Norris, and you are watching the Leading Leaders podcast. And today I want to talk about the reality that there is no one above reproach. There's no one who doesn't make mistakes. There's no one who doesn't offend someone at some point in some way. The reality is, though, that there are many who live in the spotlight, who live in the fishbowl, who are acknowledged as leaders globally, who are acknowledged as leaders in their little community. Remember, we've been talking about environment and atmosphere. And let me just be honest with you. If you're a leader in an environment, whether it's 10 or 10,000 or 10 million people, your leadership in that environment will be challenged. It will be tested. It will be stretched. It will be pushed and pulled in every direction. There will be people, for an example, who feel like you don't deserve to lead as much as they do. There will be people who believe that you should always be the leader and never be questioned. There will be people that believe that because you're the leader, you have some power or influence that could change the quality of their life. And if they just had something on you, some dirt, some skeleton in the closet that would allow them leverage to utilize your power for their benefit, then they'd find a way to use that. It's inevitable in the course of human history that most leaders fall from within, from their own failure, from their own mistakes, from their own stupid decisions. Most leaders are thought to be imperfect, but presented to be perfect until the imperfection just can't be hidden anymore. It's almost like this constant tension, like the air inside of a balloon. And the larger the influence expands, the larger the territory expands, the larger the environment expands, the larger the atmosphere expands, the more pressure there is on both the inside and the outside of the balloon to pop. And it's almost inevitable. Very few people lead in the way that Billy Graham led, as an example, who in his passing seldom, if ever, faced the accusations of inappropriate behavior or misconduct or inappropriate handling of funds. Why? Because he surrounded himself with people who looked out for him, who were honest with him, who told him, listen, what you just said may be deemed by some as inappropriate. That might be offensive to others if you were to say that in such a way, and thereby gave him constant opportunity to ask for forgiveness. To simply say, in my own mind, as I heard that coming out, it didn't sound like a bad thing. In my own eyes, in the way that I handled that situation, it didn't seem like a bad thing. But here I am finding myself now aware that what I did was wrong and I need some help. and I need your forgiveness, and I need to know how I can make this right and not do this again. And I have to be honest and say, as I look back over my life, there were things that I've said and done, and jokes that I've told, conversations that I've had, relationships that I've been in, that as I look back on them now as a mature adult, it's obvious that was a train wreck. It was wrong. It should have never happened. But at the time, it didn't seem like such a bad idea. At the time, it didn't seem, because everyone was participating and everyone was consensual, that it was just the thing. But these days, those things from 30, 40, 50 years ago tend to come back and haunt you. And I have to be honest and say, too, that there's a tension like the tension inside the balloon, the pressure inside and the pressure outside that stretches the very fiber of the latex that is the balloon. That same tension applies to both the accused and the accuser these days, because a lot of times the political agenda or the overtones of the environment and the atmosphere have more to do with the final outcome than do the truth of the accusations or the ability of the leader to cover them up. See, there are some leaders in certain circles that they could quite literally get away with murder, and there would be a giant conspiracy to make sure that no one ever attached that event to this individual, because this individual serves a purpose at a higher level, that they could literally get away with murder. And on the other hand, there are those that if they dropped a piece of chewing gum, suddenly they would be the world's greatest contributor to the demise of our earth through garbage delivery and littering. And so that tension of the accusation, unfortunately, means that there are many who have been victimized, who have been abused, who have been mistreated, who have been spoken ill of or spoken ill to, who've been touched, who've been managed, who've been manipulated, who've been led in the wrong way, who will never see justice. They will never hear an apology. They will never see any kind of public admission or confession on behalf of the person who abused them or accosted them, because the tainted view of the accuser is almost as harsh as the tainted view of the accused. In fact, oftentimes now, just the idea of coming forward and saying, someone mistreated me, brings as much spotlight and harassment and attack on the accusation, on the accuser, who is the victim, as it does on the person who perpetrated the ill. Now, I'm not even going to go so far as to say the crime, because many of the accusations these days don't involve a crime, just inappropriate behavior in the judgment of some. Doesn't that sound bizarre? Doesn't it sound bizarre that there's this scale that seems ever moving, that it's misappropriation of funds or it's inappropriate behavior, but it's inappropriate according to who? Is it the standards that leader is held up to, but not every other leader is held up to? Or is it the standards that we are putting in front of our people today, but tomorrow there'll be different standards? Because see, here's the reality. In not too many decades past, being involved in a public and open homosexual relationship would be grounds for condemnation, dismissal from the military, in many cases dismissal from a job, criminal behavior. In fact, there are still laws against homosexuality on the books in many states in the United States and many countries around the world. You can lose your life for homosexual behavior. However, in those days, slavery was acceptable. Now it's exactly the opposite. Homosexuality is a protected behavior by many laws. To speak ill of homosexual behavior, to speak ill of homosexual relationships, can be considered a hate crime in many places. And at the same time, slavery is so shunned that just to be a bully is considered a form of slavery and manipulation and will make you an outcast in a heartbeat. And how is it that those two things have been inverted? Well, societal pressure. In the same way that those things have changed in the level of their importance, there are many who find it a greater crime to litter than to physically abuse a spouse. It's bizarre to me. It's also bizarre that things that 20 or 30 years ago were perfectly acceptable in the commons of society are now things that, if you're simply accused of them, no evidence, no proof. But even if it did happen, it was between two people who said, hey, this will be fun. But now it's somehow enough to lose your spot in the public limelight. Ask Matt Lauer. Ask Bill O'Reilly. Ask now Bill Hybels. These are accusations and finger pointings that if these men were the average Joe, if these men were Joe the plumber in a small town in Ohio, accusations that would never see the light of day. Accusations that might be, hey, I used to, when they pass each other in the grocery store. But because of the position of leadership, because of the brightness of the spotlight on these people, the accusation not only is heard and voiced, but now evaluated and reviewed and investigated and publicized. Now, we find ourselves at a tough juxtaposition. On the one hand, we want justice for those who have been abused, mistreated, lied to, and manipulated. And trust me, that abuse of power doesn't just stop in the areas of sexual behavior and sexual misconduct. I've been a victim of abuse of power. I've seen tens of thousands of dollars that should have been in my pocket, and I can show you all the paperwork on why. But because it was in the interest of someone else at a higher level, I was asked to simply let it go. 3 levels above my supervisor in a face-to-face conversation, I was told, just let it go. I just let it go. I didn't do anything legally about it. It's been decades now. It's not that big a deal. But I do say, it is possible for anyone to be the victim of an abuse of power by poor leadership. Poor leadership decisions are made for the sake of the leader. Poor leadership decisions are made for the benefit of the organization, and individuals often get trampled on in that process. And so the juxtaposition we find ourselves in is there are those true and genuine victims whose lives have been altered, whose futures may have been changed, whose relationships may be forever different because of the abuse of power, sexual, financial, relational, whatever that leverage might have been. And they demand justice. And they deserve justice. And depending just how far up the food chain the person who abused them is, just how much in the public limelight they are, there may or may not be an opportunity for their voices to be heard. If that person's in the limelight, in the spotlight, on the world stage, recognizable by millions, then it'll be really easy to throw jabs at them, to throw spears up the hill in hopes that someone will notice your spear. That's what it's like to accuse a leader in the limelight of misconduct, true or otherwise. And at that point, their height in the elevation has more to do with whether or not it will ever come to light of day than does the justice or injustice of the accusation. Also, there's a truth that Leaders know that. Many leaders feel like, well, who are they to accuse me? I'll never be busted for that. I didn't do anything wrong. In my eyes, that was perfectly acceptable. In my eyes, everybody does that. In my eyes, it's just and it's fair. Give them a check. Tell them to go away. We don't have time for this nonsense. I'll hire an attorney to get rid of them. And so justice doesn't really take place. But sometimes the payoff is enough. Sometimes if I give you the amount of money that you think I owe you, will you shut up and never bring this up again? Well, if the point that I'm arguing is that you owe me money, then probably so. But if the point that I'm arguing is that you have disgraced me or disgraced my family or taken advantage in some other way, then part of the process of justice means that the ability for you to do it again has been changed. It's not just recompense. It's repentance. It's a true change of heart and way of doing things. See, many leaders don't ever reach that place. And in fact, the more spears that are thrown up the hill at them that fall short of reaching them, the more emblazoned they become. Here's a reality that we all need to come to grips with. One day beyond the courthouse, one day beyond the media harassment, one day beyond the limelight of success, one day beyond the judgment of your best counsel. One day, you will stand before a judge who not just knows the truth of that matter and that incident without any witnesses, but knows every thought, every idea, every imagination that ever scrolled past your imagination. Every image that's ever taken place in your mind will one day be on display for all the world to see. And you may think, I finished my career strong, I got away with it. You may think, any day now, my whole world is going to fall apart. You may think, I have been wronged and I will never see justice. But in the end, when all the media lights are off, when all the spotlights are off, and you stand before the judge will display. And the judge will bring justice. He is the only right ruler. He is the only perfect leader. He is the only one who has never made a mistake. And it's against his standard, not this flip-flop of what once was good is now bad and what once was bad is now good. There are things now on primetime television that you couldn't have seen on primetime television decades ago, or 5 years ago. Language that you hear at 7, 8, 9 o'clock in the evening when your 3-year-old is bouncing around the house that you would have never heard when I was 3 years old. Things that you couldn't sell in the grocery stores on Sunday because there were laws against that. Now you can buy them 24/7 anywhere in the world. There are things that you didn't discuss until it was a one-on-one conversation between a parent and their teenage child that are now found on the pages of library books in middle schools. Inappropriate images that at one point would have been behind the cardboard, behind the counter, hidden behind the rack, are now in the pages of the books that are available in the middle school library. It's saddening. But there will be a day when the judge looks at all of those things, and every injustice will meet recompense, and every wrong will be made right, and every mistake will be accounted for. And you may think, as a leader, I've gotten away with it. I'm ahead of the game. No one's going to catch me now. And you would be wrong. And you may think, as a victim, Another leader has gotten away with it. Not just me, but if they can get away with it with me, they'll get away with it with dozens. Then you would be wrong. Every leader is held to a higher standard. Look it up. Those of you who want to teach, let's use the other derivatives of that word. Teach, influence, lead. Those of you who want to be an influencer, you'll be held to a higher standard than anybody else. You better be prepared for that. And if you're not yet living your life in a way where every conscious effort is made to live a life of honor above reproach, there's no better time to start than now. Living a life of integrity is kind of like planting a tree. The best time was 50 years ago. The next best time is right now. Don't wait any longer. If there are relationships where you feel like you've done somebody wrong, it's time to make recompense. If there are people that you have hurt by your misdeeds, you should try to settle up on that score. And for heaven's sake, going forward, live by the golden rule. Don't treat anyone in a way that you wouldn't want to be treated. Don't misuse, abuse, or take advantage of your authority or your power. As a leader, there's more detriment to come from that than the bad decisions that you make about what you're going to eat or where you're going to live or what you're going to drive or where you're going to work. The decisions you make that impact others have a ripple effect for generations. Make those decisions with great sobriety. Make those decisions with great research and wise counsel from many voices on every front. Take care of the people you lead. Don't take advantage. I'm J Loren Norris, and you've been watching Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.